I'm Adrienne Gilliard here with Sandra Bazan, and we're from the ELC's Inclusion Team, bringing you Behavior Bites Tidbits. Because we got such a huge response for our Red Flag series, Sandy and I will be continuing that for the next couple of weeks. And this week, we're going to discuss the red flags for SPD, or sensory processing disorder. The term sensory processing disorder can also be used to describe someone who's having difficulty with taking in sensory information, organizing that information, and responding to it. And so we've taken a few minutes to just prepare a visual for you all. So I'm going to share my screen.
And so while you're pulling that up, Adrienne, just wanted to make sure that we include here that how do we, the sensory part, right? So this is how we as humans take in external stimuli from our five senses, actually six, when we start to talk about the vestibular and the proprioceptive and all that other good stuff. But it's literally how we respond to external stimuli, whether that stimuli is coming from what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, what we touch, or what we'll learn later on, where we are in our bodies at that time. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I put that in there, because I'm, in thinking about sensory processing, like, well, let's break that even more, right? Let's break that whole big word down. So sensory meaning from the five senses, how we process it, and then disordered means that it's not typical, it's irregular, somehow irregular.
And to help you process that idea a little bit better, let's look at this little MapQuest map. And this is a map that has come from Jane Ayers. And she says that what it's like with SPD is a neurological traffic jam. Okay. So what basically it is the information from our senses is not getting through fast enough. And so it's like having to drive through very thick and heavy traffic. You're getting the information, but the ability to process it is different. And SPD can also be divided into three different categories. And the first one is over-responsive behaviors. And with children with SPD, when they have over-responsive behaviors, it usually appears as distress caused by loud noises or really busy places like shopping malls or even the fair.
Right. So you see these children covering their ears. You'll see children when there's like simple things or like typical fire alarms in the classrooms, right? You'll see these children like cover their ears, or just it's too much for them. They get overstimulated or over just excitable, so that they have to like reduce that, right? Sorry, go ahead. I'm just gonna
also, if they are distressed by light touch or the tags or textures of clothes, the children that are having a hard time dealing with the tags that are in the back of their clothes. And a lot of times parents will buy tagless shirts, and a lot of companies are making tagless clothes now so that children don't have those issues. Also, these children have difficulty regulating their emotions, and they get frustrated very easily. Sandy, what about the frustration?
Right, and it presents as explosive, right? So these are the kids that you're like, I don't know what just happened. He was fine, and then all of a sudden, and now we have this explosive dysregulation and an inability to self-regulate. So they go from 0 to 100. It almost seems like there's no real rhyme or reason. Nothing has changed that you thought that you can sense, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that student hasn't had a trigger of some sort. So these responses seem to be like I said, explosive and unexplained, so to speak. Another one is picky eating. Have you seen those children that will only have certain textures, certain colors, certain or they have to have the same lunch, the same snack? It's always the same. That's definitely it can be a red flag for over responsive behaviors as picky eaters. Yeah.
And sometimes this is one that we overlook, because we also know that our littles are picky anyway.
They are picky, but it's
so
different.
Sometimes we overlook this one, but it is different. It's a different kind of picky.
It's like there's a complete meltdown if they won't even try. There's just like this, I don't want to say irrational, so I'm going to put it in air quotes, right? But like you're just like, I just want you to try it, and they cannot handle the texture or the smell even of certain foods, right? So they have difficulty with just self-care, typical daily routine behavior, brushing of teeth, brushing of the hair, and these simple, what we would consider to be simple daily everyday tasks now become this big just battle between parents and their children and teachers and their children, and all I did was ask them to go wash their hands. Right. So now you're just like, I don't understand, but it can be a sign of becoming of having over responsive behavioral outbursts due to external stimuli.
Right. And what about the children that avoid messy play?
Listen, have you ever gone into the classrooms or parents out there and you have this great activity planned, shaving cream on the tabletops, and you're thinking all the kids are going to want to, and then you have that one child who will not go anywhere near it, will maybe touch it like from a distance. These are the kids that cannot get their hands dirty. Oh, they get glue on it, automatically they're washing hands. They got a little bit of paint, automatically they're standing up, and they just cannot. And you can see it. It's like an over exaggerated response to what would typically be a non-issue for somebody else.
Absolutely. And our second category that we have is under responsive behaviors, which of course is the opposite of the categories that we just went through. And these are the children that don't seem to notice having a messy face or messy hands.
Right. So where over responsive is like, that's just too much. Under responsive, you got the bipolar, you have the opposite, right? So it's just not enough input. They don't seem to really get it. It can be seen as like unfazed, but it's more than that. They really honestly so the other one is like, they don't notice their peers and they tend to overly lean on their peers, or they're always bumping into somebody or something. These are the children that are on the carpet and you ask them to get up to participate and they just trample over their peers, but it's not malicious. It's almost like there is no awareness of them. They seek that input. So they'll sit in a group of kids and you'll see them leaning onto their peers or leaning onto their parents or onto furniture, right? These are the kids that have such a hard time remaining focused on the present, right? So they may seem unfocused, or they may seem like they are daydreaming, so much so that they don't respond to their name. You're like, it's almost like you've got to shock them out of wherever they are in their minds, but that's genuinely what's happening. So they may not be responsive to their names, or when you're calling for them or their attention, or you can see these students in the classroom where all the other kids are really excited and overstimulated about something, and it goes unnoticed, so to speak.
Right. And then we have the other category where these children are seeking, or what we call seeking or craving behaviors. They jump instead of walking, right, Sandy?
So they're proactively physically seeking that input. So you'll see these kids constantly, like what I'm doing right now, swaying back and forth.
Me too. I was just doing it.
I'm watching myself right on camera, and I'm like, and I can tell, and again, it's a strategy, right? But these are the red flags. So when you see a child who cannot walk, hops everywhere they go, right? That might be their way of receiving that input. So they're seeking that additional input, right? So again, they touch other people constantly. They cannot have a conversation with their hands still. They're touching their clothes, they're touching you, they're leaning on you, and they don't see the pragmatic language of that's uncomfortable for the other person, right? So you'll see these children and they're trying to have a social interaction, whether it be with an adult or a peer, and the child continuously goes closer and closer, and they don't see that pragmatic language of somebody else stepping back. So they continuously seek that closer proximity, right? And so these are the red flags, and they look like they have this motor going on. They are constantly moving. Even when you're able to sit down, something is moving. A foot, a toe, a finger, a knee. I'm doing it right now. A knee going up and down. Another one of mine is like, I have to have something in my hands, and and so that is, I'm seeking some type of input, right? And for me, that movement needs to be there in order for me to be able to regulate and kind of focus, right?
Right.
They may crash and bump into things on purpose. These are the kids, Adrian. They're so excited to go to the block center, but not for what they can build.
But for what they can knock over and hear crash to the floor.
It feels so, and you can see them just like, oh, I love that sound, right? These are the kids that are constantly opening and closing, the cabinet doors just because they like the sound, the repetitive, just that input. And then they frequently mouth things. Again, it's a sensory, I'm seeking input. So a lot of our students are still in that oratory kind of input stage where they exploring through their mouths, and just everything, their clothes are in their mouths, their hair is in their, and that's just an orally seeking behavior, right? So, you can see a lot of the behavior part of sensory processing disorders, right? I can actually see a child jumping up and down and understand, wow, that's a behavior, but the root cause of it is the sensory that child is seeking, right? So what we see in the classroom are the behaviors. What we're trying to explain now is, but those behaviors are rooted in a sensory, whatever, either over responsiveness or under responsiveness, and or a child seeking to self-regulate through these behaviors, of constantly moving, right?
Absolutely.
So, really interesting.
It is very interesting. And so these are just some of the other red flags that we have. And we've already talked about the picky eater. These are the children who are extremely picky, have their very rigid eating habits. But sometimes there are also transition issues with these children. They're consistently craving more stimulation, often both present with difficulty transitioning between those activities that they have to do.
Absolutely. So when we talked about that student that has a really hard time even attending to their name, I promise you that student did not hear the 5-minute warning that block center is almost done, right? And so this student is so into what they're doing. They're dumping the blocks because that's sensory input, right? So they're dumping the blocks because that's what they need. They didn't hear the transitional warning that the teacher just gave. And now I, as an educator, I'm going in and I'm saying, okay, it's time to clean up. It's not going to go well. It's just not going to go well, right? And so how do we, it's all of these different red flags. Okay, that's great, but what do we do then, right? So it's just a matter of understanding that we say it how many times a little bit, Adrian, all behavior is communication. Okay. So when we start to talk about well, is it sensory or is it behavior? Yes. The answer is yes. The behavior is a direct response to the sensory input, whether it's an over response or an under response, or my attempt to regulate.
Seeking or craving. Yes.
Right. Absolutely. So yes, the short answer is, yeah, it is sensory and it will come out in behaviors. But that means that we also have a lot of influence as to the environments that we can create.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
and just to continue on with some of the red flags, the children may prefer tight clothing or tight spaces. Children who prefer tight clothing like lycra or spandex, or maybe attempting to enhance proprioceptive input, And the tightness of the clothing is comforting without being restrictive or confining.
Right. So it's that.
Think about this. I think about myself as a little girl. I used to have my shoelaces tied so tightly that my shoelaces would break. I had to have my things very tight on my body. So Sandy,
Wait, I want you to repeat that. I want you to repeat that one more time because I think you cut out just slightly.
oh, okay.
And that's fine, but I don't.
No, I was just saying with preferring tight clothing or tight spaces, it made me think about myself as a little girl in kindergarten. And I remember that I used to have my shoelaces tied so tightly that they would break. My parents would have to buy shoelaces like every 2 or 3 weeks because I wanted my shoes so tight because it was comforting to me.
Because I can understand that. You're starting to learn how to walk. You want to make sure that you like your shoe. I mean, there's so many different things, but like that whole tight spaces, it reminds me of students that, you know, they get into these nooks and crannies of the classroom, like into the bookshelf, like inside the bookshelf, they'll find a way to get in there. Or if there's like a corner, they tend to go into the corner. And I can understand, I can definitely understand how that can be comforting, right? Because we talk a lot about sensory input, like those sensory hugs or deep pressure, deep compression, and it kind of imitates that. I could definitely see that.
Absolutely.
What else you got?
All right. We also have children who walk on their toes. You know, sometimes they don't like the sensation of the pressure on the foot and they want as little of their foot on the ground as possible. And sometimes these children also refuse to be barefoot. And other children who toe walk, they do that to increase the pressure on their ankles and lower legs, stimulating that proprioceptive input.
Absolutely. And it's, you know, and not, and there's degrees to toe walking, right? There's a and then there's at all times. And definitely it's something that you, for all kinds of sensory processing questions, that's for an occupational therapist, right? So what we do as educators is we need to know these red flags. Absolutely. And then have that discussion with the families, and then have the families discuss it with, you know, those that know, that are experts on all things sensory, right? Obsessed with avoiding the bright lights. So you'll have some children that those white lights in the classroom, you can't understand why this child is running around in circles. The minute you turn the lights off, it's almost like you turn the light, like you pulled the plug out of the motor that they're running on, right? So you have to be very, very aware. Is it, do they like bright lights? Or is it too much and they need more kind of like dimmer lights, softer lights, right? Same with sound. Absolutely. You know, same with sound. A lot of students like a busy classroom, and then there are some students that cannot handle that extra auditory input. And then we talked about again, the being messy. And again, sometimes it's preference, right? But we're talking about persistent. You know, there are some children that don't like to be messy, and there's not all these other red flags, right? So we have to be very, very careful when we're talking about sensory. It needs to be diagnosed. So we go into a lot of the classrooms, and in the classrooms we hear all the time, oh, sensory. Okay, that needs to be diagnosed, much like, you know, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD. We are not throwing these words out.
Thank you so much.
We are not throwing these words out. What we are saying is some behaviors might have a sensory link or component to it. And let's further investigate that. Let's go ahead and have that referral. Let's go ahead and have that evaluation to see if it truly is something externally affecting the way that I process it and coming out and manifesting in behaviors of some sort or another.
Absolutely. Now, next week when Sandy and I come back, we will be discussing the strategies that will help you to best serve the children who may have SPD in your classroom. And so if you are experiencing challenging behaviors with any of the children in your classroom, you can always reach out to Debbie Kay on our warm line, where the number is 954-295-0672. We'd like to encourage you to connect with us on our Behavior Bites Zoom that is held every Friday from 1 until 2. Speak to your director about registering. If you found this video and other videos of ours helpful, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.